Well, my name is Dale Olivia Peterson MacLennan. I'm 91 years old and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was born and raised in Chicago, however, and have some wonderful memories of that
Tell
time.
me about your grandparents. Were they also from Chicago, born and raised Chicago, or what do you remember?
I think my grandparents on my dad's side were, and they were named Jacobson, and they had the first feed store in South Chicago. And I don't know their names other than Jacobson. And then on my mom's side, they were born in Germany, and my grandpa's name was William Knodel, Knodel. Only we like to pronounce it Nodell. Knodel wasn't all the favorite name of anybody, so we call it Nodell. And his wife was Marie. I never met my grandfathers, and only my one grandma, who was Marie Nodell, and I just remember sitting on her lap and her liking to draw boots. I have no idea why, but anyway, she drew boots for me, and when I sat on her lap. My other grandma, my dad's mom, died when I was a baby. She was leaning over the railing at their back porch, and the railing gave way, and she was killed. And her name was Olivia, and I was named after her, so I'm Dale Olivia. And but I never got to meet her, I'm sorry to say. So that's all I know about my grandparents. The Jacobsons would have been Swedish. So, and then the grandma, the others are German, but they're from Alsace-Lorraine, Germany, and so there is a wee bit of French there somehow away, because Alsace-Lorraine went back and forth between France and Germany. So I feel I might have a little bit of French blood, which would be fun. So, yeah.
Tell me about your parents. Where were they born? Where are they from?
They were both born in Chicago. My mom was Emily Nodell, and she was such a wonderful mom. She was the kind of mom that when it was during the Depression, and we didn't have that much money. My dad was a traveling salesman at the time, but she would make pots of soup, and I would take them, and she would have me take them to various neighbors, because this was in the steel mill district, and a lot of people were out of work. So which was a sad time, but she was just a wonderful, caring mother, and very, very loved. So, and my dad, as I say, was a traveling salesman, but initially he and my mom had a hat lining business in Chicago. And this was a very successful business. It was across from the Chicago Theater, which is there now. And but in the Depression came, and unfortunately, Black Monday was on my first birthday, October 29th, when all of the Depression came and people committed suicide. It was a terrible, terrible time. People lost so much. And my mom and dad lost their business. So from then on, Dad kept trying to find ways to get back to the success that he had, but it didn't always work. He was the traveling agent for Lily Pons, who was a famous opera star at the time, and he would go ahead and make arrangements for wherever she was going to perform, and so he did that for several years. And during the war, he worked in the shipyards during World War II. He worked in the shipyards, and they were married on Valentine's Day in 1914. So, but he never was able to get back the success he had at one time, and he tried very hard. So, and I remember when I was 9, he was not home very much at all. He was out on the road most of the time. But I remember when I was 9 years old, I had scarlet fever and almost died, they tell me anyway. And the whole house was quarantined, and the people we had living there, and by the way, we lived in the 3-story frame home that were the Jacobsons, and that's where I grew up. And we rented out rooms. This is during the Depression, on the first floor and the third floor, and then we had one room in our middle floor, and we rented that out too. And I remember I could never ever stay in the bathroom and stay to take a long bath or anything, because I had to be sure not to stay long because of our roomer that we had there. So when I got to be older and I got to have nice bubble baths and all, I really, really loved that. But anyway, and when I was 9, our house caught on fire, and the whole back of the home, there were flights of stairs going up to the 3rd floor, and that whole back was burned, as well as the fire went through the attic. And I can still remember staying across the street with my mom, who was in her robe, and she was in shock. She was really in shock, and watching the fire come out through the attic window. And all the firemen were trying to save things, so they threw a lot of heirlooms and things from our attic down on the ground, and of course the looters came. So there were a lot of things that we would have had in the family that were taken by looters. But anyway, as I say, I remember my mom, and she was in shock, and seeing the ambulance take my dad away, because we had 2 men that were deaf in the bottom and on the 1st floor, and he's worried that they hadn't known about the fire, so he kicked the windows in and to alert them, and everybody got out okay, but he had to go to the hospital because his legs were badly cut. So anyway, those are kind of there's good memories and bad memories. But let's see.
You mentioned this house was the Jacobson's house. Is it the relative?
Well, that was Grandpa Jacobson's, the folks that owned the feed store in South Chicago. So that was their home. 9129 Exchange Avenue was the address if anybody ever wants to go back to Chicago and look it up. The building's still there, at least it was as of 6 years ago. So, and it had like 14 stairs to go up to the first, or our 2nd floor. So, but it was a nice house and nice memories. So
did it burn completely down?
No, just the back of it, and then the flames went through, and the firemen had used so much water. The ceilings in our apartment, the ceilings just were like this because they were so damaged. But we had this wonderful, beautiful couch in the living room that, by the way, had come from Sweden and won first prize at the World's Fair in whatever that was. It won first prize for its beauty. It was mahogany and carved and had dragons carved. It was a beautiful couch, and that was saved, which was amazing. And the house was they rebuilt all the damages, and we went back to living there. So
we had that sofa in our home when I was growing up as a kid. You did?
You sure did. And I loved it then. As a kid, I didn't, because I had to do the dusting and cleaning in between the nostrils of the dragon and all that sort of thing. So I didn't like that. But yeah, so we had that that was a special couch, and it's amazing it was saved when the sagging ceilings were just amazing. But nobody was, well, my dad was hurt, but everybody else got out just fine. But Mama was in shock for about 3 months. She just wasn't herself at all. So anyway, that was some of the childhood memories. So maybe I'll tell you about my jobs. And when I was 13 was my first job I had, and I sold shoes at Christmas time at Goldblatt's department store, which was about a block from our house. And I lied about my age, and of course wore lipstick and looked about 16, but I was 13. And you didn't have to have a social security card then. So that was my first job. And the next was I went to work for Uncle Ben, my uncle who was an architect, and I worked in his office and did his typing and answered the phone when I was 14. And then at 15, worked at the Naval Aviation Training Center. This was in Chicago, of course, and this was during the war, and the sailors and Marines were there in training. And I worked in the canteen there and sold soda and candy bars and that sort of thing. And that was a lot of fun because there weren't a lot of other women around and all these nice looking young men. That was just a happy time. And I think I fell in love for the first time with a fellow named Ed. I don't remember his last name, but he was very, very handsome, and I just thought I was in love, but I was not. Anyway, and then also there was a very nice sailor there who I cared a lot, and he went to work to be on a destroyer, and his name was Buddy Elmer, and he did ask me to marry him. And I would have been 17 at that time. And he asked me to marry him, and his last name was Elmer, and I put the names together, and it would have been Dale Olivia Peterson Elmer, which is dope. And I decided that was not what I was going to do. So anyway, then I graduated from high school, and because I worked after school for several years. And see, this is during the war, and I graduated from high school in '46, and we had a scholarship to the University of Wisconsin, and went to the campus and found that this was when the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Rights, GI Bill, was in progress, and so all of the men that were coming home from the war were given this wonderful GI Bill so they could go to college. And at the campus at the University of Wisconsin was full, and of course that would first go to the men, and I would have had to live off campus about 30 miles, and I didn't have a car, and we didn't have money, and so that took care of my scholarship at Wisconsin. So I came back to work, and I had been given a typewriter when I was 12 years old by Aunt Hat and Uncle Ben, and I was a pretty good typist, and so I went to work for an office called Titanium Pigment Corporation, and answered the phone and did typing and general work, and I decided I wasn't going to get anywhere just doing that, so I needed to know shorthand, which I did not take in high school because I took college courses in high school. And so I went to Dickinson's Business College, and in 3 weeks I learned their particular type of shorthand, which included being able to take medical shorthand. It was probably one of the best things I ever did, and in 3 weeks I came back and I was doubled my salary by being able to do that and transcribing letters and taking notes. So anyway, it was a good move. So I was at Titanium Pigment, and it was across from Grant Park in Chicago. So it was beautiful to get to see the lights of Grant Park during Christmas season and see the concerts there sometimes. That was special. Then I went to work for O'Neill, Larson and McMahon, they were an advertising agency at 230 North Michigan. And it is now, I'm trying to think, what do they call it? It'll come back to me. But anyway, it is still there. It looks like a gold, it has gold and black doors on the outside. The second floor was our office area, and the elevators were all like beautiful brass. It was just a beautiful building, and had a wonderful experience there. Worked hard. In advertising, you always have deadlines, and my boss was Ed Larson, wonderful man. He was 40 years old, I was 18, and I thought he was really over the hill. But anyway, he was not. And the other McMahon had been in vaudeville at one time, and Mr. McMahon kept this little card in his shirt, in his coat pocket, and he had on it the punchlines of various jokes, and he could tell jokes for 3 hours at a time. He would just, so it was fun working there. And then there was Dr. Monk, and he was the one that helped produce Minute Curl, which is one of our clients that we had. And this was something where you drop this little pellet in water and you put it on, and it made your hair curly. It was very, very popular, and this would have been in 1948. And Dr. Monk was very kind, and one of the things we have, I think Alex has it, is this beautiful engraved crystal salad bowl. So that was a wedding present. And speaking of wedding presents, Mr. Ed Larson came back from a trip to Canada. We had some Canadian clients, and he came back from his trip to Canada, and he brought back 4 different designs of plates, and he said that he had to decide on a plate, on a design for one of his clients, and he couldn't decide, and he didn't have time to go home and have his wife Fran decide. So what I did, so I chose the pattern I thought was the nicest. Well, that turned out to be the pattern that he and his wife gave us for our wedding. And so we have this 9-place or 10-piece, 10-place setting of Wedgwood bone china that is just beautiful. Alex has it, and I still have kept some to use for special occasions. But that was just such a surprise and such a thrill for him to have done that, and it was so kind of him. So, the advertising agency, it was the time of martini lunches, and this would have been 48 and 49, and so my boss, Mr. Larson, we would take our clients to these really beautiful dining places, and of course they'd all have martinis, and I did not, needless to say, but I took notes so that we would. It was just a nice way to entertain clients, and it was fun for me because I got to go to some lovely places in Chicago. So,
how did you and your husband meet?
oh, that's a wonderful story. We met at a dance, my sorority, for Northwestern, invited his fraternity, which was the Illinois College of Optometry, the Optometric College, invited their fraternity to a dance. And I was going to Northwestern nights. I was working full-time during the day and then going to Northwestern 4 nights a week. And anyway, I was new, I was a pledge, and I was in charge of the dance that night. And I was very busy, lots of things to do, and Dad asked me to dance, and I said I was sorry, I was too busy, I couldn't at the time, but if he'd like to ask later, when things were calmed down, I would be happy to. And bless his heart, he did. And so we were dancing away, and Dad, I asked him where he was from, and he said Casper, Wyoming. And I thought, Casper, what can I think about that's Casper? All I could think of was the cartoon Toots and Casper. So I casually said, well, anywhere near Casper? And he stopped dancing in the middle of the floor, and he said, do you know about Casper? And I don't know what I said, but I acted like I did. And he said, I don't think anybody in Chicago knows about anything past the Mississippi River. So anyway, that I thought was fun. And then I found out as we danced that he was Presbyterian, and I had asked because in Chicago, we have a lot of Irish Catholic people, and I have some of my best friends have been Catholic and are Catholic, but I knew I could never marry a Catholic, so I just thought, well, if he's Catholic, we'll not go into, seem like I'm interested. So anyway, he turned out to be Presbyterian, which was very, very nice. And being MacLennan, that sounded Irish, but it's definitely Scottish. So that's how we met, and I gave him my name, but I did not give him my phone number. And they were going to have a dance the following week. His fraternity was going to invite our sorority, and he asked if I would come to the dance, and I was supposed to have gone out with girlfriends that Friday night, but I called them, and usually I'm a great believer, whatever your first engagement is, that's the one you keep, even if the second engagement sounds better. You don't do that. But I called my girlfriends and told them the situation, and they said, go for it. So I did go to see Dad, and we had a lovely time at that dance, and I guess one of the funny things is I remember that at that time you brought liquor, your own liquor, to the dances, and Dad poured some whiskey in this glass, and I began being very suspicious as to what his motives were at that time, and so I had lemonade basically. So and I had them put a lot of lemonade in that, and I sipped that one drink all night long, and everything was fine. And his motives were very pure, and he was a very nice guy. So then we started to date, and the thing was, Dad was going to college. He was the librarian at the optometric college. He sold shoes on Saturdays at Baker's Shoe Store, which is a very nice one in downtown Chicago. And you probably remember how he mentioned that if you could get a size 9 shoe into a 7 shoe, a size 9 foot into a 7 shoe, you could make a very good sale. So he was a good salesman. He also typed autopsies at St. Luke's Hospital as another way of earning money. You got $75 a month on the GI Bill. So he had his 3 jobs and going to school, and I had my full-time job and going night school. So we got to see one another basically on Sundays, and we did a lot of our learning about one another on the golf course at Jackson Park. And so we would play 18 holes on Jackson Park, sometimes having to take a streetcar because he didn't have a car, nor did I. And by the way, his roommates were so interesting. There are the 3 of them. One was Paulie, who was Jewish, and 2 was Glenn, who was a spiritualist. And Glenn believed that he had a guardian angel that was at his side at all times. And they were both wonderful guys, and all 3 of them as different as anything could be. And once in a while, Paulie would loan us his car, and we'd use that to go golfing. But we learned about one another on the golf course, which was wonderful. And we met in November of 1948. Yeah, November of 48. And we're engaged in July of 49, and we're married in September of 49. And I had believed when we met, I was going to be a career girl, and I believed in long engagements, and I wanted to do my career first, but that didn't turn out. He was more important than the career. No, I have to mention too, when we met one another, I thought he was about I thought he was 24 and he was 29, and he thought I was 24 and I was 19. And when we found out that there was a 10-year difference, we were both shocked and decided that probably wasn't a good idea. So we didn't see one another for about 3 weeks. And then love took over, and it was, we decided 10 years wasn't going to make that big a difference, and it didn't, other than you're going to be a widow. So, but now let's talk about Dad and what a great guy he was. Born in Wyoming, was in World War II, of course, and he was in the Air Force for 5 years, and he was a radar. He was a radar, not a pilot. He was a radar person, and he was on the planes that would go back and forth for transports taking the soldiers to Germany. And while in Germany, one time his brother Finn was also in the Army, and he was over in Germany as an engineer, and Les's best friend, Emmett, whom they'd grown up with since 5th grade. No, since I think maybe first or 5th grade. Anyway, they were very best friends, and apparently had some very interesting times together, as I was told. And he met Emmett in Germany one of the times, and Grandma Mac said, I remember her saying, I wasn't so worried about the boys until I heard that Emmett and Dad and Lester were together. So it was just kind of the fun thing. Grandma Mac had 3 sons in the service in World War II. The eldest, Finn, was an engineer in the Army, and he was over in Germany. The second son, Jack, was he wanted to go overseas so badly, but he instead became an instructor. He was also in the Army. And then Les, who was in the Air Force, who was in radar operator. And I can't imagine how horrible that might have been for Grandma. Finn, especially as an engineer, was in a grave danger also, because they always went first to get bridges made and that sort of thing. But anyway, but Les, he loved to ride horses. These are all before I knew him, so I don't know all that he did, but I know he loved to ride horses. I know he earned money by caddying on the golf course, and he had many, many friends. He was one of these people that men liked him, women liked him. He was a happy man, and I remember when I first met him, he said, when I get up in the morning, I can choose to either be happy, I can either choose to be happy or sad. And he says, I choose happiness, and he always did. This was his wonderful personality, that was a happy personality, one of the things that made me fall in love with him.
Now, you do have one time in your life that you went horseback riding with my father, yes?
Yes, we did. We were on vacation in Wyoming, and we were at this dude ranch, and the friend of Uncle Kenny Nelson was the owner of the dude ranch, and he said that he would like to take us all for a ride out in the plains and out to see the area. So, and he asked me if I knew how to ride. Well, I had ridden a couple of horses at Jackson Park, the kind you lead around. I'd never ridden very much, but I said, well, I had a little bit. And so he gave me his daughter's horse. And so we were riding along, and we had to go along these mountain trails where there's just room for one horse, which was really scary, but a lot of fun. And then we came to this open plain area. And I remember, what his name was, Dude, I think. I can't remember. Anyway, he said, and now we'll separate the men from the boys, which meant that we could gallop and go, and you'd find out who knew how to ride. And I found out at that time that his daughter's horse liked to be the horse in front, never liked to be behind any other horses. So when we had this open plain, my horse decided to gallop. And off we went, and I'm scared to death. I'm holding on to the what do we call it? Whatever the horn is on your saddle. And I'm also holding on to my hair because I had a wig on. And it was about 100 degrees that day, hotter than the dickens. And I guess we'd been swimming and I needed a wig. So I was holding on to my wig and this whatever on the saddle. And I had sunglasses on under the wig, and I could feel the glasses inching up and up. I could feel that wig going up. And I thought, what am I going to do? Do I hang on to the wig? Do I die if I let go of the horn? So I decided to hang on. It was better to live. And that wig went off and flying through the air. And I heard all this whinnying behind me of all these horses, and we stopped. Of course, we all stopped. And the one of the ranch hands who was riding with us, came up to me and had my wig, and he says, "Is this yours, ma'am?" And I said, "Yes, thank you." And I later learned, and then I put my wig on and I rode off. And I remember the whinnying of the horses behind. Apparently the color was kind of a possum color. And I think the horses and all thought that it was an animal flying through the air. So there was, and Scott, you probably remember, there was a little consternation, or there was a lot of, there was a lot of teasing afterwards. I've never gotten over that. And because we had Jack and his family were there, and Kenny and Margaret were there, the whole family, it was like a family reunion. And when we get together, I'm occasionally reminded of that. So that was our horseback ride, and Dad still stayed with me, bless his heart. He was a real trooper. So,
let's go back to your wedding now.
oh,
So,
wonderful,
You
right.
guys have this courtship,
We have the
you
courtship,
decide to get married.
right.
Tell me about the wedding.
Oh, the wedding was beautiful. Uncle Ben and Aunt Hat gave us the wedding at the Southside Swedish Club, and they invited many of their friends. It was a big wedding, and we had 6 attendants in the wedding party, and it was a very, very precious time, and so good of Aunt Hat and Uncle Ben to do that for us. As I say, it was at the Southside Swedish Club, and we danced, and I can remember Aunt Hat. I have a picture of her as I was going into the out of the car into the church. And by the way, the church was at the wedding was at the First Presbyterian Church in Chicago. I was baptized there when I was 18. I was not baptized until I was 18 because my parents wanted me to choose what religion I wanted, and I appreciated that. But anyway, that was the church that we were married in, and a beautiful church. And we danced at the wedding, and it was just a very special time. And I remember after the wedding, my mom was, of course, single, and I remember we went up to see her after the wedding before going to the hotel, and we went up to see her, and on the way up, I had rice falling out of my hat, and we met somebody in the elevator who just smiled and knew that we were newlyweds, but we went up to see Mom first just to let her know we were okay, and she was really sad because she was losing a daughter but gaining a wonderful son. So that was, then we had a great honeymoon to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and that you either had newly married couples there or a lot of old people using the hot springs. So we met a couple of couples there that we became good friends with, and it was a beautiful, beautiful honeymoon. And we borrowed Uncle Ernie's car to be able to go there. And Ernie, by the way, was one of Grandma's siblings. She had five siblings. When before my mom was born, her brother Otto had passed away, and when they knew Mother was on the way, they went back to Germany and to Berlin, and so she was born, and Grandma was born in Berlin, and then they came back here and had my Aunt Hat, my Uncle Ernie and Uncle Eb, and and Uncle Elmer, and all of her siblings died before the age of 62, and of heart or stroke, and Mama lived almost 98. So, which has always been to me an amazing story, and apparently I've gotten her genes. I know at 62 I wonder what might happen here, with crazy little thoughts that one has, but here I am. So now back to let's see, we were at the wedding and the honeymoon, and Aunt Hat and Uncle Ben, who were so kind, they were also they were the reason Mother and Grandma and I survived nicely, because they would help financially. My dad was able to make some money, but it wasn't that much to support us well. And although we lived in the house and we used the roomers as support, but Aunt Hat and Uncle Ben were always there for us, and they would go. We'd travel to Florida to visit them when they moved down there, and Aunt Hat and Uncle Ben were just so kind to me. They gave me my graduation present was a trip to their home in Florida, and wonderful restaurants, and I remember somehow being in a lake and rowing in a lake, and a barracuda coming up next to the lake and looking with all those teeth. I can remember. These are fragments, but just something that I remember. This was in Hollywood, Florida, and had a wonderful time. But Uncle Ben, one funny thing I can remember, when they got their new home, the sliding glass door to the lanai, and he wasn't quite, well, they weren't quite used to the house, but I remember he had his cigar and he was going to lanai and he forgot the glass door was, and I still remember that that cigar smashed against him and the glass door. And when if I want to think of something funny, that's one of them. So they were very special. Oh, and very blessed. So, and Aunt Hat was, of course, Grandma's sister, and she loved. When I think of Aunt Hat on Scott's after, and I'm skipping, I know, but Scotty, we was 6 months old, and we had Christmas at their house, and all the family, Larson family was there, and the family was so thrilled because Scott was our first grandchild, their first grandchild, and so Scott was the center of the table. I still remember this beautiful table set, and he was set in the center, and it was just a very precious thought. And oh, how they loved. And Aunt Hat, I can remember her playing on the floor with Scott and Grandma, and Uncle Ben not so much. He was a big man, but Scott was the hit of the family. So for many a year. So that was special. So now where shall I go? Shall I talk about after Dad and I were married, because we were at the wedding, then he graduated from optometric college in February of 1950, and we decided he would stay and work in Chicago with one of the optometrists there, so we could, and I would continue to work, so we'd have some money to start a practice perhaps on his own in Iowa. And we found, Les, and going through the optometric magazines, found a Dr. Lepper in Mason City, Iowa, who wanted to sell his practice. So we went to Mason City, visited with Dr. Lepper. He was 82 years old, decided he should quit his practice. So all the arrangements were set, and I gave up my job and our apartment, of course, and we were off to Mason City. And Les went the day before to make arrangements, sign the contract and all, and then I was coming the next day. Well, that night, Les called to say that Dr. Lepper had changed his mind. He wasn't going to sell the practice, and he wanted to die with his boots on, so to speak. So we were high and dry. Didn't have any place to go or anything. Well, we didn't have any place to go. So we went through the Blue Book of Optometry, which showed various areas in Iowa, and we chose Iowa because Iowa is a very strong state on professionalism, and Chicago was getting very commercial, where you had a lot of these kind of sometimes fly-by-night glass places, and Dad wanted to be very professional. So anyway, we chose Iowa, which was close, so we could be close to my mom, because with her being alone. So we went to various places in Iowa and looked at some towns that didn't have an optometrist and thought this might work, but we, of course, had very little money. We're looking for some way that he could become an associate with one of the optometrists, rather than trying to start your own business, which you starve at for about 3 years. Anyway, we found out that Dr. Wayne Getman, who was president of the Iowa Optometric Association and from Sioux City, Iowa, needed a partner because he was traveling the state as the president and not able to be at his practice as much as he needed to be. So we went to Sioux City, a very nice city, and thought this was going to be a wonderful arrangement. Well, number one, Dr. Getman didn't have as large a practice as I think he thought he had, and we realized he didn't. So Les's patients they weren't knocking at the door. And I did get a job working at the, I'm trying to think of the name, at a advertising agency, and I was production manager there from my background in Chicago. So I was able to help us get by that way, and so between the two of us, we got by well, and we had our little Scotty, who was just 6 months old. So it was a very interesting time for us. And while we were in Sioux City, we made many young friends, and that was wonderful. And however, financially things were not that great because Sioux City had a major flood. And I still remember standing on the top of the bluffs looking over the state of Nebraska, which was on the other side of the Missouri River, and just seeing almost nothing but silo tops. Homes were flooded. It was unbelievable how bad the flooding was at that time. So that didn't do Sioux City any good. And then the next year, it flooded again, not quite as bad, but the three rivers that converged at Sioux City flooded, and they had another major flood problem. And then the third year we were there, they had a polio epidemic. And none of this does very well for a practice, so we knew we could not survive there any longer. So we decided we would have to move, of course. And we were with, there were 8 couples of us that palled around together, and 7 of the 8 all had to leave because of the financial situation. It was that bad. But anyway, then we heard of this opportunity in Muscatine, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi River, and a Dr. Emerson, who was an ophthalmologist, needed someone in his practice, and he wanted an optometrist. So we went there and met he and his very nice wife, Bess, and moved to Sioux City on New Year's Eve. And I can't remember what year it would be. Let me see. Well, I know it's 1954 because 6 months before we moved to Muscatine, we adopted our Scotty. And I can't tell you the joy. We had wanted for 5 years. We thought we'd have children as soon as we could after our marriage, and as soon as we had enough money for something, and nothing happened, and I didn't get pregnant. And so while in Sioux City, I was going to the same doctor that Scott's mom was going to, and he knew about both of our situations, and he arranged the adoption. And Scotty was 8 days when we met him and held him, and so I still remember the joy that we had, and he was such a good baby. He slept that very first night. I still can't believe he did that. But he did, and he was such a good baby, and we were so thrilled. So I can remember one funny, after he'd been with us maybe 2 months, I think I had to go to some meeting or another, and Dad was going to be in charge of taking care of Scott for the first time. And when I got home, he was still cleaning things up, but apparently he had felt that Scotty was hungry, and he cried, and so every time he cried, he gave him a bottle. And Scott got a little too much milk and really upset all over the place. So Dad didn't babysit a whole lot until he got it down a little bit. And another thing I remember is that our house was on a hill, and it was during the winter, and I would wash Scott's diapers, and we had a washing machine, but we didn't have a dryer. So I had to hang them on the line that went down, maybe 30 feet down. We had put up a line, and I remember hanging Scott's diapers on that line, and they would be so white and beautiful and great because they were in the sun, but also they were frozen solid when I'd bring them in at night. So those are the funny things that all of a sudden you think about. Frozen diapers, yeah, those were the interesting things. But we moved on New Year's Eve of 1954 to Muscatine, Iowa. Now I went, Dad took me there with Scotty and I there, and then he went back for some more second load of furniture. And I still remember it was snowing, and I was so praying the whole time that he'd be okay to get back home, because it was a snowstorm thing, and he was in the car with a trailer. But anyway, he made it fine, other than he did not bring the rocking chair that I loved to rock Scott in, and Scotty would have earaches, which were horrible, and I would rock him in I loved that rocking chair, and Les left it there. He said he just didn't have room for it, but I'm never sure, and I'm still, when I think about it, I was angry with him about that for a long time. And we never did get another rocking chair. But anyway, that's one of the funny things. But our move to Muscatine was one of the best things we could have done. The people were wonderful. Les had a wonderful practice there, and Muscatine was a town of 25,000 people. We had 3 big companies that were basically the background of Muscatine. There was Mandag and Stanley Engineering, and the button industry. And by the way, if you didn't know, Muscatine at one time was the button capital of the world, until the Japanese came in and started to make plastic buttons. But all the buttons in Muscatine were pearl buttons. So we had some wonderful times. We were there for 36 years, had wonderful, wonderful friends there. I remember of the many times on boat rides with the Sox on the Mississippi with our other friends, and that was such fun to do. And Les was active in the Elks, and was grand exalted ruler for 2 years. They had these wonderful titles, and we were very active in the Elks for years, and had wonderful, wonderful times. I remember one of the funny times is, I think it was a New Year's Eve, that we had been at one of the Elks dances, and we came out to get our car, which happened to be a little TR4, I think, Triumph, and went out to get our car around 2 in the morning, and it's gone. And we could not find it anywhere, and we thought it had been stolen, of course, and we called the police and all that. And what had happened is 4 of our dear friends had taken it was so little, they lifted it up and carried it somewhere or another. I don't know how they did it, but they took it behind a particular shed near the Elks Club, and they hid it for us, and it was, I remember laughing so hard after we found it, but prior to that, we did call the police. Of course, that caused a little problem, but in a small town, the policemen know everybody, so it all turned out to be fine, and nobody got in trouble. But it was funny to want that little car being stolen, as it was. But many happy times in Muscatine. In '65, I started with another friend some preschool vision screening program. And in the schools, they had not ever had anything like this. And many times children, when they begin in their kindergarten years, when they begin school, people don't realize that maybe they can't read or they can't see well enough to be able to reading. So we started this vision screening program and had 12 wonderful volunteers that came in, and we did that for several years, and we know we helped save some children some problems in school when we were able to discover if they were having any vision problems. So that was something that I felt very, very good about. And then in 1976, they had the elm disease in Iowa, and we lost all of our elm trees in Muscatine. And so we started a tree planting program, and to this day now we have our beautiful trees. But we had, I remember Scotty and Mark. No, Scott wasn't there then. Mark and his friends and many of the young high school kids, trees from the nurseries, and taking them to various homes and various businesses and all, and it was a very successful endeavor, and I'm always so glad that I was part of that, and they have those pretty trees. And we have one planted in front of the First Presbyterian Church in honor of Uncle Finn, because he passed that year. Now, we're still in Muscatine, and when we were there about 3.5 years, along comes our son Mark. And that was another joy, because we didn't want to raise Scotty alone, and weren't sure we might have to adopt again. And then we met this doctor in Muscatine, and he did a procedure with me, and by golly, along came Mark in October of '57. And I remember going out the door, going to the hospital and saying we weren't sure whether it was going to be a Mark or a Heather. In those days, you didn't know ahead of time. So anyway, we had our Mark. And however, while in the hospital in that day, Les and Scotty came down with the Asian flu, and they were so sick, of course. And then the day after Mark arrived, I got the Asian flu, so I didn't get to see Mark for about 4 days. And I always wanted to know what a newborn baby was like, because I didn't have Scotty brand newborn, and always wondered what they were like. And of course I didn't find out again, which was a minor thing. But anyway, but they had the Asian flu, and my mom had to come in and take care of them. And Scotty did not happy with me. He didn't want to talk to me when we were in the hospital. I would try and talk to him, and he was not happy. His mama wasn't there, so that was a little hard time for all of us. But anyway, they got over the flu. My mom was there to help them, and she then moved in about 4 years later with us to be with part of our family for years afterwards. But anyway, so now we have our 2 wonderful sons, and that's another whole adventure, being a parent. You learn, I always thought that you could read a book about how to be a parent, and I learned that early. That isn't the way it is. You just, parenthood is a learning process, and a wonderful, wonderful process. So anyway, and the boys went, and they did well in school. And at 14, though, Scott was out hanging with some friends, 2 other friends, and it started to rain, so the farmers sent them home, and a drunk driver came over the hill and hit them straight on. they called me from the golf course where it happened in front of the golf course, and called me to tell that Scott was in the accident, and I was packing to come to Albuquerque, which is one of these strange coincidences, but I was packing to come to Albuquerque, and we were going to Albuquerque and California. And I can remember I got to the golf course before the ambulances did, and I remember Scott coming out of the house at the golf course, and he had this patch of skin hanging down here, and he said, "Mom, I have a really bad Excedrin headache." And I still, it isn't funny, but I still remember that. And then as I drove up there, two of the boys were laying in the road, but they were, the ambulance was going to get them, but it was a scary time. And he had a broken jaw, and at our hospital in Muscatine, they didn't somehow know that, and they gave him a hamburger that day, and we ended up going to Iowa City and having him taken care of there. But it was so, poor kid had to drink everything through a straw, and it was and he had a nasty scar, but he was alive, and that was the big thing. But that was when I thought, oh, Albuquerque sounded like such an intriguing name, interesting, exciting name to go to, never dreaming that I'd end up here. So that was my first taste of Albuquerque. Let's see. And then Mark was in the hospital when he was 13 because he had this horrible pain in his hip and his leg, and it turned out that he had a degenerative problem in his hip, and if we hadn't operated, he possibly would have had a shortened hip the rest of his life. So that was when he was 13, and that again was Iowa City. So that's part of raising kids, and thank the dear Lord, they're such healthy men now. Let's see, what else do I have here in my notes? We're in then we, after our wonderful times in Muscatine and many friends, and Les's practice being very successful, we did go to Hawaii for a wonderful seminar trip, an optometric trip. And let's see, when Scotty was 16, he chose to stay home, and he became as I remember, he was a butcher in one of the grocery stores, and he chose to stay home. But we took Mark with. He was 13. We had a wonderful time in Hawaii, and have some marvelous films of that. So that was a very special trip, and it's still one of those things where you learn to how much it is to relax and just hang loose, as they do in Hawaii. Let's see, and then we decided to move to Florida, that Les wanted to retire. He was 72, right, and decided he'd worked long enough, and he had, and so we decided to retire to Florida. And we left on June 17th of 1986. And that was the day that Alex was born. And I still remember we knew that it was imminent that she might be arriving, and we were keeping in touch with Scotty, who was in Boulder at the time. And remembered on the way, we called from a station in a little telephone thing on the side of the road to talk to him, and and little Alex was fine, and he got to, I remember him telling him how he got to hold her and put her in a warm bath, and she just relaxed and just was just a wonderful baby. And talked to Maria, and she was fine, and that was a very special, so I always will remember Alex's birthday and the day that we retired to Florida, which was a wonderful treat for us. We had a lovely condo, and we ended up with 3 different condos there, but it was such a joy to be there and in that warmth and not have to worry about shoveling snow, and it was just great to be able to move there. And my mom, we after we got a little settled, then we came back and picked up my mom, and I will never forget that experience, because the plane was late leaving Moline, and Les was already in Florida, so I was just Mother and I, and the plane was late leaving Moline, and we got to Chicago O'Hare, and our plane was scheduled to leave in 10 minutes from the time we arrived to where we were supposed to go. And I thought, well, we'll never make it, but we had a wheelchair arranged for Mom. And I remember truly running through the airport. The porter was pushing Grandma, and she had the biggest smile on her face. She was having a ball, zooming through the airport. And I was dying behind her, trying to carry all our stuff and running too. But we did make it. But that was one of those times I really thought I'm gonna die. So, and when I think of Muscatine, I think of our wonderful church, the First Presbyterian Church, and I was probably as active in that as anything that I did in Muscatine. I did deliver Meals on Wheels for 12 years with my dear friend Stell Jan, and I think of how we would get lost many times if we had to deliver the meals out in the country area, and how we would have to find our way around many times, and sometimes then we would come back and we'd have a big hot fudge sundae, because really we had worked very hard. But we had wonderful times delivering Meals on Wheels. And I also taught Sunday school at the church for about 12 years. And no, 16 years, I think. And that was a joy. Was on the House Committee. I was chairman for a few years. And I remember we had a problem with bats in the belfry, and finally remembered that I'd read an article that bats can't stand certain high frequencies, so found a unit in one of the little magazines that you could put up in the rafters, and it's supposed to get rid of bats, and by golly, it did, and so we didn't have any more bats, so I was happy about helping to get rid of them. And was also on the House Committee, and I remember one of our members, John, I kept a list of what everybody needed to do as their particular jobs on the committee, and I know one time John came up to me and he said, "Boy, Dale, am I glad I'm not married to you," and your honeydew list is way too big, but we used to joke about that, but that was a fun thing, and I was an elder for a couple of sessions. Being part of that church was very special, and wonderful friends there, and it was a great place for the boys to be able to be raised, and so I feel very blessed to have been part of that church. Well, now we're in Florida, and we are enjoying it to the nth degree, and I brought Grandma home after quite a time at O'Hare Airport, and we found a lovely home very near our condo, so I could visit her every day. and that was very important. And she loved it there too, and they loved her, so that all worked out well. And we had so many of our Muscatine friends that had condo in Florida, so it was like a second home, and it was such a wonderful time of just being able to just enjoy life and have fun. Became active in Pasadena Presbyterian Church there, and made so many lovely, lovely friends. So I guess no matter where you go, there are wonderful, wonderful people. And as we were, and we in our condo, we had a couple that he was from Columbia. He was Jimmy, and Yaki, and he couldn't say his J's well, so Jackie was his wife. It was Yaki and Yimmy, and we had so many great times with them, and they were wonderful friends. When Les was diagnosed in 1991 with Alzheimer's, and that was a real blow for all of us. And our friends in Florida were our Muscatine friends there, Carl and Joyce, and Jackie and Jimmy, and many other friends were such wonderful support system. And when we determined that he had Alzheimer's, we had to make some major adjustments. He was so good about giving up the car. We were driving one day, and he was still driving at that point, but he almost drove in front of another car, and he just pulled to the side, and he was the one that said, "No more driving." And I never had to take the car's keys away from him, which many times is something that happens when people get older or become ill. So I was so proud of him that he just gave that up without a bit of a problem. And he was, during the Alzheimer's time, it was gradual, but then it became apparent that he couldn't be left alone. And so my church friends and other condo friends would stay with him if I had to go shopping or do something or other, so that because he would wander, and I could take him shopping with me, and he was just fine, but I had to just keep him right next to me, because wandering was one of the things that is very normal with Alzheimer's. But he was a really wonderful patient. He kept his smile and his dear disposition most of the time, although we had a few months where he was really not grouchy. He just didn't want to do what I needed to have him do, and one of the things was showering. He did not like showering, and I would have to go into the shower with him sometimes and help him, and that wasn't working well. But I went to a support group meeting, and there one of the wives said she had problems with her husband too, and she learned that when you shower them, if you start with the shower head at the bottom and gradually work up, it's just fine, and they're very happy. But it's the fact that when the shower hits their head at first, they don't feel like they're in control. So I learned a lot from my wonderful support group, and from then on never had any more problems. And I've shared that with a lot of other people that I know that have had problems with Alzheimer's and showering. So that was a good lesson learned. But and he would go to we had belonged to a Bible study group of wonderful 4 couples, and who were so kind also, and he would go and he would listen, but of course he wasn't participating. But boy, when it was snack time and treat time, he was the first one at the table, and he used to love his chocolate and candy. And I remember when the grandchildren would come to visit, I would tell them, and they had such fun trying to hide the coffee, the chocolate, and the candy from Grandpa so he wouldn't overdo. And speaking of grandchildren coming, we have six wonderful grandchildren. When our Ian was born in 1985, and when Mark and Kendi lived still in Iowa, and we were so thrilled about the idea of our first grandchild, but he was born prematurely, about a month prematurely, because Kendi had fallen down the stairs, as I understand, down a stair, and he was born a month prematurely and was in Iowa City for a good 3 weeks with all these wires, and he was 3.5 pounds, and we were very grateful that he lived through it and became such a sweetie, and until he passed away in 2017 at the age of 32. Mark and Kendi were on their way to Florida on vacation, and Ian was house sitting, and he didn't answer, and they called his best friend John to go and check and see what happened, and Ian was in Mark's favorite chair, had been watching TV, and he passed away of an enlarged heart. So completely unexpected. None of us, it was a terrible shock, and still is. But he was such a sweetie, and he was in the wine industry, and when he passed away, his company, Fox Valley, had a special wine made in his honor made in his honor to commemorate the positive influence he was with the wine industry in that area, and how well liked he was, what an achiever he was, how hard a worker he was. He was so well thought of, and they had a very special commemorative ceremony when so many people attended. He was very loved, and he's missed. So he was our first grandchild, and then Alex was our second, and she was born in June of 1986. And did I say anything about? Yes, I did, that about Scott and putting her in the warm water and how well she did. And so we'd have Alex, and then the December of '86, our Mikey was born, and to Mark and Kendi, and that was such an exciting time too, and we were so thrilled. But Kendi had another difficult time in delivery, so she's been a real trooper. But anyway, so we have 2 new grandchildren in 1986, which was such a joy. And then Maxie came along in 1988 in August of '88, and I remember we went in early to be able to take care of Alex, and I can still remember we were down sleeping in the living room, and Scott came down his spiral case with Maria at about 4 in the morning, and I was groggy, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Mom, we're having a baby." And I still remember that. That was one of those fun things, and little Max arrived and was just fine, and so have those 4 wonderful grandchildren. And who would have dreamed 10 years ago, would I have ever dreamed that would have 2 special grandchildren from Nepal. Never would have imagined that would be, and they have been such a joy in my life, and so dear and caring and loving. And so I am so blessed with 6 wonderful grandchildren. And I will mention when we lived in Florida, of course, the Mark and Kendi and Scotty and Maria would come down to visit us, and we had wonderful, wonderful times there. We would go to the Breckenridge Hotel, and they had a big, beautiful swimming pool. And of course, right out the door, we had the Gulf of Mexico, which was fantastic to swim in. And oh, the kids would have such times walking the beaches and visiting with people as they'd walk the beach. And it was a really very special time in our lives, and to be able to get, like, we could never see enough of them, of course. Those are one of the joys we had in Florida. So I had many wonderful things until Les's illness came, and that changed things a lot. Although the first 7 years I was able to take care of him pretty well. I with the help of friends and the church friends and other friends, they would watch him, as I say, so that I could do shopping or do whatever needed to be done and give me a little rest in between times. But it became apparent that I needed to not take advantage of friends like that, and we needed to be near family. And so Scotty was in Albuquerque and invited us to come down to be with them, and that was so appreciated. And I still remember Scott and Mark getting a U-Haul and driving, I think, 18 hours to bring all our furniture and all down here. And they did that before we left. And so when we got down here, they had the house, this dear rented house that Scotty had, and they had the house, everything set up for us, even all the furniture, even pictures on the wall, as if we had lived there, and everything was all ready for us when we came there. I'll never forget. Oh, excuse me. But that was so dear of them, and so appreciated. However, we found out that Les would not be covered in New Mexico because of this particular organization who had put in some clause that worked for 2 years, and we happened to be in that 2-year era. So anyway, after talking with talked to the head of the insurance company, the insurance agencies in Florida, there was nothing I could do. So that was a blow financially, but that's the way it was. But we came to a lovely home and dear family here to greet us and to be with us. So we came in May of 97, and in December of 97, they had a humongous snowstorm. And I remember having 9 feet of snow in our backyard, and I remember we measured that because my cousin and my cousin Peg and her family came to visit us for Christmas. And the children went and they measured that in the snow, but it was a blessing they were there because my niece was a CNA and she was able to help me with Les, or it would have been difficult. Scott couldn't get through it all with his with snowplow or anything for about 3 days. So we were really snowed in, but that was okay, but it made me realize that we would have to do something with Les, because if I was snowed in again and didn't have anyone, it would have been a difficult situation. So on New Year's Eve of 97, we took Les to the Picard Picard Nursing Home, run by the Presbyterian Church. And it was New Year's Eve, and I remember these beautiful silver containers of food, not trays, I can't think of the word, but anyway, all of this wonderful, beautiful looking food, and it was an elegant evening, and I thought, this isn't too bad. And of course, Les was a good eater, and he thought it was just wonderful, and he did not resist going. He didn't do anything. He just was there, and I stayed late, and until he was put into bed, and so then we began 3.5 years at the nursing home, and I visited him every day. Then and usually went in around noon because he needed to be fed, and his little hands were at the point where he couldn't feed himself, and that was so hard to see. But anyway, they were very, very kind to them, and he didn't know me anymore as his wife, but he always had a big smile whenever I came in, and he knew somebody loved him there, and it was wonderful, and I became active at the nursing home, and ended up as chairman of the resident council, and Picard was going to be sold to another company, and we had found out that it was not a reputable company, and I called 22 members of the board to tell them that we understand this new company they were thinking of selling it to was not good. And we did have another company that we knew was good that wanted to buy them. And so anyway, it worked well that the company we wanted, they sold to them. So that was an interesting time, and Scott Athens was the head of the new company called Laurel View, and they were very kind. So we were very, very blessed to have them, and I became good friends with the staff most of the time, and I would go and visit other people who didn't have any family, and when Les would take a nap, I would go and visit him, and I enjoyed doing that, and it turned out that after Les passed away, which was in February of 2001, they asked me to work for him because I had worked in activities, and so I worked with them for about 12 years, and that was most enjoyable because I got to meet so many people, and I had several jobs. I was either a receptionist or maybe a unit secretary to work with the nurses, or sometimes a liaison where I would work with the families who are bringing someone in, and it's very hard to bring someone into a nursing home, and it's hard to do that, and it's helpful to have someone that's been through it to be able to guide them a little bit. So I was very grateful to be able to do that. So worked until I was 84. But then walking and getting to more than anything, it was the weather and the darn old wind. From walking from the car to the building would get difficult. So the time came to stop, and I would go back today if I could, because it was wonderful being to meeting all the people, and to visiting with the dear elderly people who are, I'm one of them. So anyway, it was a joy to be there, but not a joy to have Les in his condition. But he was a sweetheart, and thank heavens he was not in pain the last 3.5 years, so that was a big blessing. But it's hard to see someone so vital and full of life to have the road that they have. But I guess Ronald Reagan, there are many, many people who have been through this, but it's hard to see a vital person be taken with Alzheimer's. So any of you that can help with the Alzheimer's Association would be wonderful. Now, let's see. So after after working for a while, and then went to enjoy being home and being with friends and being active in my church here, Covenant Presbyterian. I was on the mission committee for 18 years, and my favorite mission at Covenant Presbyterian Church was the Ave Asbury Cafe, and this is an organization that for 3 weeks out of the year during the state convention makes pies and other things in their little cafe, and all of the profits go to feed the homeless. And it was a real joy to be on that committee's. One year we made 200 pies, and the bigger churches make 400 and 500, but we're not a big church, but we made 200 pies one year. Now we have a lot of this is 18 years ago, and a lot of our pie bakers have grown older or passed on, and so we are now only making 100 pies a year. But it's a marvelous organization to help feed the homeless, and the proceeds all go to 10 different charities. That's what they have to feed the homeless in order to get any of our money. And last year we made $50,000 in 3 weeks' time, which is pretty tremendous. But pies and ice cream and goodies can be a good fundraiser. So it was a joy to be on that committee, but I had to give it up a couple of years ago. It was getting more than I could handle. We needed new blood, and we always do. So that was my effort on the church. But still, I'm on the mission committee, and that's a joy. And now I moved to Brookdale. Let's see, in June of 2017, in June of 2017, and in July of 2017, little Alan Ian joined the family along, and he has, and this is Mike and Laura's little boy, and he is a doll, and he has a big sister, Peyton, who was born in May of 14. So I have 2 wonderful great-grandchildren, and I get to see them now. From now on, we have a tradition that we started last year, 2 years ago, in 17, that I will come down on Father's Day. I will go and visit Mikey and Laura and the children, and Mark and Kenny will come down, and we have a family reunion. And at that time of the year, the Meridian, Idaho, where Mikey lives, has an annual chicken wing festival. And people and they have maybe 10 or 12 different people that make their chicken wings, and of course sell them. And that is such a fun thing to do, and wonderful chicken wings of all, you can't imagine the different kinds that there are. Asian and pina coladas, and anyway, it's a wonderful time, and it's a great time to look forward to being able to be with that little family, and looking forward to next year, and it's now a family tradition that I get to go down at that time of year, and so I'm most grateful for that. So at this stage, there are so many things to be blessed for, and I enjoy being at Brookdale. I've made some lovely friends there. I have wonderful friends at church, and hope I can still be active and have a purpose and be helpful in some ways to some people. So I've enjoyed visiting, or we haven't visited, I've done all the talking, but it's been a joy, and I so appreciate Scotty doing this. I've been wanting to have a journal, and of course, the wanting to and doing are two different things. So this is my journal for major things that that happened in our lives, and I think I'd like to end with wishes that you all are happy, and of course my greatest wish is that you would all know the Lord Jesus, and you all may come to that in different ways, but that is the joy of my life, and I pray you all have the peace and the love that He gives and enables you to give to others. And that I would wish that you all will practice kindness, being considerate, honest, and integrity. And of course, in my heart, you all have that. And I would like to close with a prayer that my mom made for she and I, because I was an only child, and she did this saying, if we ever got lost from one another, we would always know who we were if we remembered this prayer together. So I'd like to share it. I taught it to the children and the grandchildren, and I don't know who all uses it, but anyway, it's thank thee, dear Father, for thy goodness to us today. Help us to be better in every way. Keep us all happy, well, and content. In Jesus' name, amen.